What happens to the comparative advantage when you have a country like China admitted to World Trade Organization and a company like Apple that's able to brand their products in California but manufacture under near slave labor in China? Is that consistent with that notion, or is that something different?
That's an excellent question, because it allows us to see the difference between comparative advantage in a classical sense, which is some trader goes to China and engages a firm that's owned by the Chinese and operated by the Chinese, and they make their own decisions on allocation of capital and labor, and then they offer a product which is the trader then ships back to other markets and then makes a profit as a trading business. But now we have these enormously wealthy corporations and banks which can then go in and buy local assets or control them, and that's what's happened in China. The government there is, of course, influenced by the same concentrations of wealth and political power as any other. And so Apple goes in and either buys outright a company that then hires the Chinese at dirt cheap labor, or they arbitrarily close that factory and move it to Vietnam because if it suits their profit.
So the world trade, for the most part, has become a zero-sum game where the only cost advantages and value added happens in the currency trading market, in the Forex market, through the banks. And now you've got America and the U.S. involved in a trade war, but it's not really trade they're talking about, it's the currency valuations. And America wants the Chinese currency, the RMB, to appreciate as a way to help America's export market.
Yes.
Now, America's calling China a currency manipulator. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a bit of a ruse that to hide the actual mechanism of trade between China and the U.S., which is mostly that companies like Apple, they control the whole process, what the means of production, and to use Marx's term, of production in China. They own the company, they own the whole procedure, so the vast majority of that profit flows to Apple, not to the Chinese. And so if we ask how much of the Chinese exports do the Chinese actually control and own, it turns out to be a rather modest sum. And so this whole huge flow of products from China to the U.S. actually benefits U.S. corporations immensely. And so the ruse is to make it appear that the Chinese are somehow engorging themselves with immense profits based on this trade with the U.S., and it's actually the U.S. corporations who have skimmed most of the profits.
Talking about China also, of course, people automatically associate the neoliberal model, the Milton Friedman school, with Republicans. And yet, during the Clinton administration is when we saw a lot of things happen that contributed to today's crisis. Number one, of course, they admitted China into World Trade Organization. Was that at an appropriate time, a good thing to do? Was there maybe some more examination needed, or what's your thought about that?
Yeah, I think the Clinton era you mentioned, of course, deregulation of the financial sector went hand in hand with that entry of China, and I think it certainly fits into the neoliberal model of deregulating financialization and allowing free capital flows and allowing the exploitation, if you will, of workers in other countries, which is kind of what globalization is all about from one point of view. The alternative vision would be to see that trade in a classical sense is beneficial, or could be potentially beneficial to people of all countries, but only if the sovereign states themselves control the assets and the capital flows. Once you allow Apple or any other company to own your political process and have unlimited capital flows, then you've relinquished your own control over your own economy.
Okay, so we have globalization of capital and finances for corporations and banks, and they're not charged for these transactions. They're not taxed on these transactions. It's an opaque shadow banking system, as has been described. And yet individuals themselves, workers, to get over borders to seek jobs, it's extremely difficult to do. So humans are kept in these regional sovereign pens, prisons, but capital can roam free. Capital is free, but the people are not free.